time. Good evening. My name is Linda Novi, and welcome to the MCL After Hours presentation. We're delighted you all have chosen to join us. It's great. We have an interesting and informative presentation tonight by two well-known ecologists. We've just had the pleasure of chatting with them, and we know you're going to find this talk of value. I want to thank Mike Swayze and Vicki Nichols of MCL for making this program happen, as well as Martha Richter-Smith, MCL's office administrator, and Barbara Crow in the office. Many thanks to them. They're going to keep everyone muted. We will be able to see each other if we have our screen on, and we just want to avoid interruptions. At the end of the presentation or throughout, you can send questions that you may have vis-a-vis the chat feature. You can do that at any time. We'll answer as many as we can, and we're probably going to combine some that perhaps are similar. You'll see in the chat that we have posted MCL's website, as well as how to join MCL. If you're attending this program and you aren't a member, but you'd like to join, please do consider clicking on that link and joining us. Personally, I've been a member for 30 years and continue to find that MCL is my bedrock of environmental knowledge, engagement, and activism to protect our beautiful county and beyond. Martha's also going to post a link to our most current newsletter. In it, you're going to find a range of articles, including MCL's most recent award winners, articles about the drought. Our president wrote an article about its impact on plants. It's very interesting. There are updates on Marin County parks and open space road and trail management plan, and an update on the Point Reyes National Seashore Plan. And I want to thank Nona Dennis and Kate Powers for producing this incredible publication. And lastly, please save July 21st for our next MCL After Hours event. Kevin Cooper, an experienced biologist and wildfire fighter, is going to be sharing his learnings as the lead resource advisor for the Burned Area Emergency Response Team, acronym BEAR. And he was the lead person in the 2018 Thomas Fire, managing the assessment before, during, and after the Montecito debris flows. You won't want to miss this, and it's sort of another aspect of wildfires that we need to consider. Now, for tonight's program. I've been reading the book Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter by Ben Goldfarb, and we've got that again in the chat. I am very amazed about the ecosystem engineering work that beavers do so well and how many other species they support through their work. And as Kate mentioned earlier when we were having informal conversation, the beavers also create buffers in wildfires. So their services are numerous. We'll begin the program hearing from Brock first, then Kate. And they are both with the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center's Water Institute. And we're posting a link to the Water Institute. And I looked up their mission, and their mission is so important because they are looking at how do we address the impacts of climate change on the water cycle. And I believe, and I know they believe, that beavers are going to be a big part of that solution. So please, without any further ado, Brock and Kate, please introduce yourselves and tell us why beavers matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and for the rest of your team. It's such an honor to be invited to speak with you all tonight. And thanks for everyone for taking more time to sit in front of a screen and be on Zoom. I know it's been a long year for a lot of us, so hopefully we'll make it worth your while and provide some entertainment as well as some education about what we've been doing with Beaver. And as Linda said, I am Kate Lundquist. I work with Brock in the Water Institute at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, which is just above you all there in Western Sonoma County. And we've been doing this work for, oh boy, almost 2 decades now, Brock. It's been a while that we've been doing this conservation work together, and it's exciting to get to share what results we've been having with the beaver component of that work. And so the way this is going to work is Brock is going to carry out the first half of our presentation. He'll hand it over to me, and then we will take the Q&As afterwards. So thanks again, and Brock, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Kate. And thanks, Linda, and everybody at MCL. I've always, over the time of being in Sonoma County, I've always admired the work that I've witnessed that you all at Marine Conservation League are supporting and bringing attention to. And so thank you for being those folks holding it down there in the county south of us. Yeah, we're going to jump right into the show and get into this and talk about beavers. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and then we'll put this up. All righty, that look good? Thumbs up, somebody, yeah? All righty. Yeah, so as Kate said, we are from the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, and we're going to get into talking about this idea of beaver in California and what we've been trying to come up with a sense about how do we create a culture of stewardship, of coexistence with beaver and a relationship with beaver. And so the way we've put together the night show is we're going to do a little bit of context and some history and a little bit of backstory, some biology, a little bit more just about the beaver itself, the organism of beaver and what beaver do, how they behave, and some of the co-benefits with humans. And then we'll talk more about the humans in the beaver and how the policy and the politics and how we can be more convivial with our caster comrades in that regard. So yeah, if you don't know where Occidental Arts Ecology Center is, have a look, but we're right above the bustling metropolis of Occidental. So after you've gone to have your all-you-can-eat Italian meals at the Negri's or the Ganellas, depending on which side of the street you choose, or you're on your way to the coast out of Coleman Valley Road, towards Bodega Bay there, we're right on Coleman Valley Road. It's an 80-acre property, and it's a retreat center, alternative energy, appropriate technology, community organizing, organic farm, school garden training, wildland restoration organization that has a program in it that's also known as the Water Institute, which is the Watershed Advocacy, Training, Education, and Research Institute. And we've spent the last 20 years of that, doing that work, really thinking like a watershed, promoting what we call conservation hydrology, which is once again in vogue right now. So looking at gray water systems or compost toilets and roof water harvesting or stormwater management or groundwater recharge or riparian restoration, salmonid recovery, a bunch of those things. And the beaver portion is something that we really found our way into in many respects formally, because we've been working a lot on specifically the recovery of coho salmon. Much like you all in West Marin, say the Lagunitas system, Olima, Pine Gulch, Redwood Creek, we're going to talk more about. In the Russian River Basin, the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, the property actually is in a tributary that drains to the lower Russian River. It's called Dutchville Creek. And that's a very important creek to the recovery of coho salmon. And so we got involved in the coho salmon recovery game in the late 90s, early 2000s. And as you well know, there's the population decline of coho salmon throughout the state has been really dramatic and significant. And the effort to try to recover them and the creativity around a whole myriad of techniques to recover them, from in-stream habitat and dam removal and large woody debris and roads and sediment and broodstock programs. And so at some point we were reviewing the peer-reviewed literature, especially out of Washington and Oregon State, and seeing a number of papers that talked about beaver and coho salmon and the connection and the recovery. And we just started thinking, well, we're doing everything else for coho, let's talk about beaver. And that has commenced this crazy little journey we've been on. So beaver for us is still an entree into the whole watershed. And we'll talk a little bit about a couple papers that we were co-authors on in looking at the historical ecology of beaver. But one of them we spent a lot of effort looking at traditional native names for beaver in California. And we found upwards of 60 different tribal names within the state of California for beaver. And so we just are sharing the name that we found from the Coast Miwok people, for whom all of you in Marin County are in the tribal territory of the Coast Miwok, who currently are known as the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, combined with the Southern Pomo. And so I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that because I don't know how that accent works. But yeah, we are talking about, though, the North American beaver, Castor canadensis. There's 2 rodents on the planet in the genus Castor. There's Castor canadensis, the North American beaver, that runs through most of Canada, most of the lower 48 of the US states, and a little bit into northern Mexico in kind of the Sonoran area. And the limit of beaver, it appears over in sort of the Mississippi, Georgia, Florida zone, Louisiana, may have to do with where the alligators limit them. It's kind of an interesting thesis, but there are beavers down in those states as well. And then there's a beaver named Castor fiber. And Castor fiber is the Eurasian beaver, and they span through the UK, across much of Europe, and all the way into Russian parts of Asia, Mongolia. So that's the 2 species. They're both northern hemisphere species. We'll just truncate any questions about the beavers down in Tierra del Fuego in South America and the issues with that. That's an unfortunate conundrum of beavers that were brought down there for fur farms that escaped. And beavers have never been native, modern beavers, in the Southern Hemisphere. So we're only dealing with beavers that are up here in North America. And we're only talking about Castor canadensis right now. And OAC, the Water Institute, have, again, as Kate mentioned, we've going on 10, 11 years now, formally engaged in what we're calling our Bring Back the Beaver campaign. We love grizzly bears, but we're sad that grizzly bears were extincted in the state back in the 1920s and 30s. And so we've decided to put the beaver on the flag for a little while. The bear flag revolt started in Sonoma County. We think the beaver flag revolution is starting in Sonoma County as well, for those historians out there. And the primary components of the Bring Back the Beaver campaign are the bullets there on the upper left. So tonight is really about education and outreach, and thank you all for being here. And hopefully we'll see how well we're doing with the education when we get to the Q&A afterwards. We also engage a lot in citizen science, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then research and demonstration. We're going to talk more about some of the research and some of the demonstration around non-lethal coexistence. And then we're going to definitely wrap up, and Kate will talk a lot more about policy, various policy issues with beaver in the state. We do have this booklet here, The Beaver in California, Creating a Culture of Stewardship. And I believe we can make sure to put a link in the chat so you all can have a direct link, and it's a downloadable PDF if you would like to have a copy of that. We do have hard copies, but we could sell them to you for the cost of the printing and paper if you would like one of those and such. But really, we're, our goal is really ultimately to try to support California in becoming more beaver aware and recognizing that we do have beavers, and how do we learn to coexist and take better care of the beavers we've got, and then ultimately work towards facilitating restoration of beavers in the state. One of our colleagues, a man named Dr. Rick Landman, kind of coined this phrase here of the California fur rush. I think many people think about the gold rush, and some of us might think about what I often refer to as the soul rush. So the mission period, where there was a rush for souls, and then there was a rush for gold. But in between the soul rush and the gold rush was the fur rush. And the fur rush really began in California with the Russians and some of the American sea captains who were working the sea, the Pacific coast, primarily focusing on fur seal and sea otter. And Marin, West Marin County and West Sonoma County, obviously Tomales Bay and some of those areas in the Farallon Islands, were hotspots for the fur rush, obviously the sea otter fur seal piece. but we did find evidence of actual beavers being taken back in the day in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Maybe not as focused as the sea otter, but nonetheless, and maybe more related to trading with native tribes. And this fur rush piece is, I think many people then think about the fur trappers that came, the quote mountain men, the Jedediah Smiths, the Walker and Carson and those type characters who came over, you know, worked for the Hudson Bay Company or the Astor Company, and they came over from the east or down from the north and trapped really hard in the Sierra Nevada and the Central Valley, and in fact in areas of the coastal zone, especially up in the Klamath Basin and obviously where the Klamath meets Oregon up there. And you know, it's interesting that the maritime fur trade was really starting in the late 1700s, and we don't get the fur trapper, mountain men type folks until say 1827, 28, 29. So there's a full 30 plus years of fur trapping that happened on the coast. And we in our coastal counties got hit early and often. And that complicates things when we tell the story about our beaver native to California. And the indisputable answer is yes, beaver are native to California. And then the question is where in California? California is a big state. It's a very diverse state. And so that's been the fun part about the conversation. You'll see in this image here from this Fish and Game Commission report back from, say, the 1914 to 16 era, the estimate of beavers was maybe 1,000 beavers were left in the state around 1916. They were pretty much wholly extirpated out of the state. And there were just beavers there just because they don't need to make dams. They could just burrow in the bulrush and such. But they also were beavers still in the Klamath, in that upper area around the Shasta zone, and also down along the Colorado River back in the day as well. And that led some of the early scientific folks like Joseph Grinnell to really hypothesize that beaver were basically only native to the Central Valley, the Klamath, and the Colorado River system. And this map here is a bit of an interesting map. So first of all, the sort of hatched area that you can see that are delineated, the portion up above with the Klamath, McLeod, Pitt River, that area that rings the Sacramento, San Joaquin, and then down in the Colorado, that was again what was asserted was the native range of beaver by some of the early folks in the 30s and 40s, Joseph Grinnell and this gentleman, Donald Tappy. What's interesting about this map as well is that from 1923 through 1950, the Division of Fish and Game, what is now called California Department of Fish and Wildlife, actually relocated or translocated beaver throughout the state. So all these the little circles throughout that map outside of those areas is a place where beaver were actually moved throughout the state. And so in fact, at the bottom here, back in on October 23rd, 1947, what were called golden beaver, meaning they came from the Central Valley. You had a couple beaver that actually originated in Merced County and were put in Glenbrook Creek. If anybody knows where Glenbrook Creek is, it's over by Muddy Hollow on the west side of Point Reyes Station there. On your way to Lehman Tour, before Lehman Tour Beach, you can go off to that trail in the Muddy Hollow, Glenbrook area. And those beavers were dropped in there, but unfortunately they don't appear to have survived. We don't know why, and whether they got an acute case of lead poisoning, meaning they were shot or something happened, we don't actually know, but there was an attempt. But it is interesting to note that even Donald Tappy in 1942 talks about the idea that according to them in 1942, that is now understood that soil erosion and the shortage of water in some places is really the result of the destruction of beavers who were formerly built and kept and repair their dams in these streams. And so that was the driver of the rationale for translocating beaver, had really to do with the sense around water and streams and the importance of water. And many of you may have seen this video. It's got put on YouTube a few years ago. It comes from Idaho. And back in 1948, the folks in Idaho actually were parachuting beavers, throwing them out of planes in specially designed boxes to reintroduce them into very wild places. And if you look up Idaho parachute beaver on YouTube, you can find the video. It's super fun. But California, not to be outdone, actually in 1950, we had our own beaver parachuting program. And Kate and I did a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request to the department for a bunch of their translocation records. And what we got with it was actually all the plans. So if you would like to know how to make your own beaver parachute and the weight of the canvas and the number of grommets and the string, we've got the plans for you. I know there's a big demand for this out there. But they dropped some beavers up in the El Dorado, what is now the El Dorado forest there, kind of south of Tahoe. But you'll see, again, they're thinking about these beavers, that the dams in the mountains save water for fish, wildlife, and agriculture. Unfortunately, after 1950 and post-World War II and the baby boom and the big water conveyance structures, the beavers became beaver non grata in the state. And it's an interesting, there's a 50 to 60 year window where there's a beaver blind spot in California. And we've really are trying to show people that that's not the case. The only and functionally the last formal report about beavers in the state was written in 1942. It's this one here by Donald Tappy, The Status of Beavers in California. Again, you'll see the same hatched area where they were projecting was the probable range. They had some ideas about subspecies of beaver back in the day. At this point, modern science and genetics don't recognize any subspecies of Castor canadensis, or races, if you will, of the species. But that report, I think, didn't sit well with a number of us who were really thinking like, why no beavers on the coast and why no beavers in the Sierras? And there's so much habitat. And so we got to work thinking about this. And Dr. Landman and Kate Lundquist and Heidi Perriman and Eli Assarian and Michael Pollack and Rick Landman's son, actually, Christopher, we've published a couple of peer-reviewed papers in the California Department of Fish and Game's journal. So we put these historical ecology papers. You can find links to them on our website. We can put links in the chat if you would like. One paper is about the historic range of beaver in the Sierra Nevada. And then the paper shown on this slide here is the one that's talks about the historic range of beaver in coastal California, which we put on here just because of the emphasis on this show for Marin County today. And you can see we had museum specimens, zooarchaeological specimens. We found certain documented records. We looked into the place names and beaver place names, indigenous names, and tried to assemble as much information as we could that has different levels of rigor, if you will. And you can see that these papers we published back in 2012 and 2013, actually. So they're a little bit old. But I think what you'll notice in the slide on the left is we left the hatched areas on the slide, but the area that we've got outlined in red and then within green, so basically everything minus kind of Death Valley, upper parts of the Mojave, Salton Sea area, we think from our research should be acknowledged and recognized as a beaver habitat at time of contact. And thus beaver ought to be recognized as native to that area and managed accordingly. And this is going to come, Kate's going to address more of this when we talk about, for those of you who are like, why can't we have beavers in Marin County? Which is a great question. And so beavers are very adaptable. They're generalists. They go from high mountain meadows to the red rock canyons of the Southwest to the image in the lower right there of urban beavers taken by our friend Rusty Cohn in Napa River, or Martinez urban beavers. They're rodents. They are mammals. They have those big incisors that keep growing and they need to keep chewing. They have that amazing big tail that they use for fat storage and swimming and alarming when they slap it. They have a really cool little, on their back foot, a split toenail that helps them groom because they have to take care of their fur as aquatic mammals, really important. They're an interesting mammal in the sense that as a rodent, they don't tend to breed, they breed basically once a year. They'll have that year's kits, they'll have last year's yearlings, and they may have 2 years ago juveniles that just haven't decided to go to college yet. They're taking a gap year. So they've got a whole, they maintain these colonies and they stick together and they don't breed like rabbits, if you will. They're very conservative as far as that goes. And they're very artistic in the way they their teeth to sharpen and their wood. One of the things we know about beavers is that if they happen to have a lake and it's already impounded and there's plenty of depth, then they'll build the classic beaver lodge, which you can see in the lower right hand there, where they've got the submerged entrance and the stick lodge, and they have their little scene inside of there. And depending on if there's snow and ice or not, how they manage that. In the photo in the upper right, if you kind of look down into there at the edge of the green shoreline, not where the trees are, you can see little canals where the beavers have dug into the canals, and you can actually see a lodge out in the edge of that lake there from the Sierras. But over here, mostly in the coastal zone, we don't have a whole lot of natural lakes, to be honest with you. There's not a whole lot. Clear Lake, a few things. So our beavers tend to be riverine beavers, riparian type river beavers, which means they often tend to make dams, like you can see in the photo there, because they need to impound water and make deeper water for a whole bunch of reasons. They're more adept at swimming. They want to hydrate the landscape because they are growing trees, which is their food. They need escape cover because that mountain lion in the center of the photo is probably the dominant, after humans, the dominant predator of beaver in California is mountain lions. If we were in grizzly country and wolf country, well, we are now in wolf country, thank you, in California. So wolves are here now. So maybe increasingly we're going to put a picture of wolves on there. But they also need that escape cover. But so they are what are known as bank burrowing beavers, where they'll burrow into the bank and make a den up underneath in the bank. That's a lodge that's just a bank lodge, but the same beaver. So they're not different beavers. They are a keystone species, meaning this metaphor that the keystone, the stone at the top of an arch that holds up the whole arch, is a species like beaver, where if you pull that stone out, there's a trophic cascade, there's a collapse. Wolf are keystones, orca are keystones. And beaver, we think, that the presence of beaver creating habitat disproportionately benefits more species than if the beaver were not present. And for many fish, especially the salmonids, the trout and the salmon, elk are really correlated. Western pond turtle in the sagebrush country, sage grouse, really known to be connected to beaver habitat. This is a Cascades frog in the the southern Cascades, northern Sierra. Willow flycatcher in the lower right there. Blackback woodpecker we found nesting in trees killed by beaver ponds. So there's a really large literature about the benefits that beavers provide to other species of animals, plants, and then also the complexity they create. And so how beaver dams reconnect floodplains, they recharge groundwater, they increase stream flow, they can help cool water down. The falling water across dams can increase oxygenation in that system. So they have a bunch of benefits to the hydrologic cycle, if you will, the abiotic benefits and biotic benefits. But again, for us, coho salmon, and this is a fish we took a photo of in Devil's Gulch off in the Lagunitas system, for those folks who know that. One of the cool things about beavers is that they're very connected to improving water quality. And beaver wetlands, the associated wetlands that form up oftentimes behind beaver dams, become these incredible biofilters. And they store sediment and they create what wetlands do, that we all know what wetlands do, and beaver created wetlands can do that equally as well because they're a beaver wetland. So this is actually a title for a thesis done by Sarah Muskoff in 2007, looking at the benefits of beavers, the effect of beaver on the removal of phosphorus in Taylor Creek, which is a tributary to the lower Tahoe, Lake Tahoe, which we know Lake Tahoe's got issues with water quality because of nutrients coming into the lake. So we think that beavers keep Tahoe blue because they're helping sequester those sediments and the phosphorus and the other anthropogenic pollutants from all that development around the rim of Lake Tahoe. And then there's a whole piece that people are getting very interested in around beaver and the relationship to riparian in these wetted areas, in this beautiful photo by Joe Wheaton of the Sharps fire up in Bog Creek, Idaho back in 2018. Look at how the whole area is burned out except for that area where the beavers were. And water doesn't burn. It's amazing. And they actually were flying over this when they were surveying this, and they saw how bears had actually gone into this wetted area and saved themselves. And then Dr. Fairfax, Emily Fairfax, who's down at Channel Islands University down there, did a whole really fascinating study looking at basically Google Earth imagery pre and post various fires and where there are beavers, and correlating the benefits at a certain level to the presence of beavers, increasing the resiliency or the presence of habitat in these areas because of the beaver. It's not like the whole area around where it isn't beaver habitat didn't burn, but the benefit of it. And then increasingly, especially in the drought, thinking about we in California, the benefits of beavers. They don't make water, but they hold water on the land longer. They can spread it out. They can slow it down. They can sink the water. And so do we live in a water scarce area or a storage scarce area? And can beavers increase the retention and storage of water in our state? And these are just a couple quick images here from a wonderful woman named Carol Evans. So we're in the Elko district of central to northwestern Nevada, Elko, Carlin area, if you know that area. 6 inches of rain average, high desert, Great Basin, sagebrush, pinyon juniper. This is Susie Creek, deeply incised, dehydrated. They've been grazing it in the hot season, overgrazing it clearly. And so they stopped grazing cattle in the hot season, and they basically allowed the system to slowly recover, and they stopped killing the beavers. So pull the cows out of the hot season and stop killing beavers. And from 92 until 2012, the beavers showed up, they reconnected the creek, they're re-aggrading the stream, they've created a wetted riparian corridor from bank to bank, and then amazing wildlife was showing back up, and the system perennialized again, and a number of trout returned in this otherwise very dry system. All you do is stop killing beavers and manage grazing. So our mantra is that we fight incision with incisors, and we're sinking our teeth into this issue, and we're supporting that beaver can help mitigate those issues. Dams aren't the whole story. There's some studies done up in the Smith River where the beavers don't dam that river, where they're bank burrowing. In that image below the water there, you can see the entrance to the burrow and the complexity of the habitat that they create. And what are these folks here called river reefs? And these bank lodges created these river reefs that then became habitat for all of these amazing species that they documented and published a paper and a thesis on. And so again, even without dams, beavers are a keystone species in these systems. And so we're not so beaver aphilic that we think that, you know, they're a silver bullet, if you will. They're not going to solve all of our problems, but we think beavers don't deserve a lead bullet. And so our sense is that, you know, as the beaver might say, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But in that context, we think we're damn well better if we work with the beaver. And so with that, I'm going to pass this on and stop sharing screen and let Kate take it away from here. All righty, there you go, Kate.
Thank you, Brock. I just had to unmute myself. Lovely, lovely. And I will pick it up from here. Wonderful. Wow, what a whirlwind, right? So many things to know and learn about beaver. It's never ending. And there's always so many more fun things to discover. And we have been working around the state and in the arid West for years now, and some friends and colleagues in Marin County started bugging us several years ago saying, well, come on, why aren't, you know, are there beaver in Marin County? And if not, why not? And why don't we bring them back? Can we just bring them back here and repopulate the county with beaver? So you can see this is, I apologize for all this terrible text in this slide. I try to avoid text as much as possible, but I wanted to make sure that we honored all of the participants in our steering committee. We have folks from the RCD on the call right now, and that organization has been a real great partner in this endeavor, along with the Marin Municipal Water District and SPAWN and some retirees from Department of Fish and Wildlife. And Jerry Merrill has been definitely at the forefront of this effort and really is the one who has been just keeping the flame alive for really trying to figure out how we can bring beaver back to Marin County. So we designed this feasibility assessment process to determine if and where beaver restoration might be appropriate. In West Marin County is where we focus this assessment, and it's still underway. We're soon to complete the initial findings. And basically what we wanted to look at is the physical conditions of several of the key watersheds to just determine if they're suitable for beaver restoration, and then start feeling the waters for community interest and support of beaver restoration, because not everyone wants to have beaver around, and ultimately put all that information together and make that accessible to folks who want to take next steps and decide where to go next. So let's see if I can get my slide to advance here. It's not, oh, there we go, come down here. So the first thing we looked at was, well, where are the beaver in Marin currently? Do we have any? We have heard at time up in San Rafael, in areas on the bay. What you're looking at right here is a map from inaturalist.org, which unfortunately the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has not had the funding or mandate to track beaver to the degree that we would like them tracked. And so they do not know what the current distribution and density of beaver populations in our state are. So they're operating blindly, like a lot of us are. And so we have been really advocating for folks to try to aggregate all of their data and sightings into one place. And today, that one place is iNaturalist, because it's a great resource and it's super user-friendly for both the scientific community and citizen scientists as well. So if any of you are out there anywhere and you see beaver and you want to help us out, definitely make an observation. We will be very grateful for that. And so you can see here that right now the map does not show any current observations for beaver in Marin County. That doesn't mean that they haven't shown up. It just means that we don't have any records in this format. And so knowing that means we don't have a source population to try to entice to come into watersheds where we think it would be appropriate for beaver to show up. We certainly have plenty right now in Sonoma Creek, which is great. They're doing very well there. And we've had a lot of great success in educating landowners and putting in coexistence devices, and really, you know, at this point, we're even working with the water agency, Sonoma Water, to do a whole beaver management strategy and help them put in these devices on Fire Creek. So that is well underway, and we're super excited about that effort. And we'd love to see similar things happening in Marin if it makes sense. And so the first question out of everyone's mouth is, well, why don't we just bring them back? Why don't we just relocate them? And that's a great question. We would love to, if the habitat and the politics can withstand beaver. So this is my partner Kevin and I relocating beaver with Sherry Tippie. We were having this conversation before we got started in Colorado, and these were nuisance beaver that were down in the Denver suburbs that were allowed to be relocated up into the Rocky Mountains. And then in this photo, I am actually checking for the gender of a beaver. That was one of the trick questions we were going to ask. Does anyone know how to determine the gender of a beaver? And it turns out that they actually do not have any obvious parts that you can determine that with. And in fact, you have to express oil from they have a special internal gland that you express oil, and by the look and the smell, you can tell if it's male or female. So that's what my assistant, he's holding the swab that we were going to use to determine the smell. And apparently motor oil is a male and blue cheese is a female. Go figure. That'll be a great trivia question one day. So what about California? Can we move them in California? Well, I'll just skip to the end just to answer that question. Right now in California, we are not allowed to possess or move beaver. And we've had long conversations with the department about this, and there's a variety of reasons. Most of it has to do with concerns for liability, who gets blamed if the beaver then caused damage as a result of their being moved, concerns for fisheries health as well, disease transmission, things like that. I will address those questions or those concerns in just a minute. And I will set, California, as far as most states in the arid West goes, is pretty behind in terms of current policy. So thankfully, in 2019, the Wildlife Protection Act made it so that the recreational trapping of our native California fur bearers, including beaver, was banned. And so that took that off the table. So now they're no longer being trapped for recreation and for the selling of their furs. And the department, to their credit, has added coexistence information, with a great deal of prodding on our part. And that now is available on their website that they offer to landowners. The key is, however, is there is a code that says the department shall issue depredation permits to any owner or tenant that has property that's being damaged or being threatened to be damaged by beaver. And so that's how California loses most of its beaver, aside from predation. It's through humans not figuring out how to coexist well with them and then just getting a permit to kill them. And right now the department's hands are tied. And so they, some regions will try to encourage you to do non-lethal strategies first, but they can't legally make that a requirement. And so that's something that actually that the Water Institute is working with other NGOs right now to change that code language, especially in places where we have these amazing endangered species that are thriving in beaver wetlands. The fact that any landowner could just yank that beaver out because they're having trouble with it is troubling for us. And so we really want to make sure that there's a higher bar to get those beaver depredated, and that we check for listed species first to make sure that we're not causing the death of those species, which is illegal under our Environmental Protection Act. And so back to the relocation question, almost every state in the West allows relocation. They have come up with ways to approach this, whether it's Oregon or Utah or Washington, New Mexico, Nevada. And one of the examples that we are really interested in mimicking is that which is happening in Washington. And so they had to force the issue through a legislative act, and they initiated a pilot in which they train people to become beaver relocators. And so they have all the science and the techniques, and they can follow all the necessary protocols to prevent disease transmission and make sure that the habitat is appropriate for beaver. And the liability piece is answered by having the landowner take full responsibility for moving that beaver. And they have to get everyone within a certain radius of their land to sign on to this relocation. So it's not, without certain steps that are, rigorous. And in some cases, in some areas that would be a harder task to achieve, but it is possible, and there is a pathway, and so far it's going well. And so we really are interested in talking to our department to see if they would be willing to take on such a pilot. And if they are not, then we could force them through a legislative action, which we are in conversation about right now. So there already is this amazing body of beaver and what we call process-based restoration science out there that's been well vetted and implemented for years now. And it's gotten a lot more press because it's been super well articulated in these two guidebooks that if you're in this world and you want to learn more, these are definitely the go-to guidebooks to learn all about both techniques and how they interweave with one another. And this is really just trying to support people to think about riverscapes on a bigger level and look at it as a system and really think about things from a process standpoint of we have flows, we have time and evolution, we have space, and we have materials, and we have all these other processes that are really helpful disturbance processes like healthy fire and beaver and all those different things. So all of this has been really well explained and really backed up by the scientific literature. And so for those who are naysayers or don't really believe that this is a legitimate approach, this is where you want to send them. And thankfully, California has decided to start adopting these practices on scale across the state. We have a lot of stuff happening up in the Scott River watershed up in Siskiyou County. They were our early adopters who were willing to go out there and stick their necks out and go through all the hoops and really work hard to get beaver restoration approved and permitted. And in their case, they have endangered coho here on the Scott River, and the beaver dams are blowing out. And so they wanted to make them persist and make them more frequent. So they put in what we call beaver dam analogs. It's like a mock beaver dam that we want to mimic beaver. And ideally, you put them in places where beaver already are, so they will adopt them, maintain them, build off of them, build more around them, and just add more roughness and complexity to our river systems. And it works really well. This is right now the only place where they've got fish surviving in an area that's super dry from the drought. And similar, we've been working a lot in the mountain meadows. So we've been working in salmonid streams on the coast, and then we've been really trying to help the folks that are doing mountain meadow restoration implement these techniques as well. This is a great project and it was started through a study funded by the Department of Fish and Wildlife to look at the benefits of beaver to biodiversity and to carbon sequestration. And so they focused on cascade frogs and willow flycatchers and others, and got really positive results showing there's a very, very, very direct and strong correlation to the presence of beaver, ensuring that the presence of willow flycatcher were there, and greater density of songbirds. So that's really positive, and that is expand, and it's happening now. It's happening in San Luis Obispo County. More and more of work is taking flight, which we're really excited about. And there was a tool that came out recently. Our colleagues at Utah State University, who have been doing this work for a long time and are behind a lot of this research, they have this assessment tools, the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool, the BRAT. They had done it for Utah and several other states, and we got to work with them to do it for part of, and so it includes all of the Sierra, the Southern Cascades, and the northern part of the Coast Range. And we managed to get them to squeak in Marin County as well. Thankfully, Joe Wheaton is actually he's from St. Helena himself, and so he was willing to throw in the Bay Area just because he's a nice guy that way. So the idea of this model is just to help folks prioritize where they might want to go out and do ground truthing to really see where beaver restoration might be really beneficial, that there's enough vegetation to support beaver, that there is the proper slope, and that, you know, there's not too big of a drainage area and the flow is not too great that it just would blow everything out, but that there's enough persistent flow that it would support a beaver colony. So we took this and used those results to look at Marin County, at least on the West Marin side, mostly Tomales Bay watershed, but some of the other little watersheds below Pine Gulch. And this is just one layer of many, and it's really, everyone loves to play my favorite pixel and zoom in of like, oh, I live over here and look, why is it white? There's all sorts of different reasons. You can see the key is over here for what we're looking at here. And basically, this is just the take home that we have is that, wow, the park actually has a lot of good flow, not a lot of infrastructure nearby, and has vegetation that could support beaver and has other conditions. So that's kind of a no-brainer there, but there are plenty of places, you know, on Alima, you know, there are places on Lagunitas as well. And even, you know, Walker has some great places as well. So it's been a mix, and, you know, so the next body of work has to really just like, what are the toggles? And for the most part, what we're finding is it's proximity to infrastructure, which isn't always a bad thing, depends on, you know, what the infrastructure is. And then vegetation, you know, food to support beaver, because beaver, they're vegetarian and they've got all that weight. They're trying to support 80 to 100 pounds just on eating bark and leaves and roots and grass. And so that's a lot of vegetation that they have to go through. And, you know, thanks to the Shrimp Club and everyone, you know, who's been doing all the willow replanting over the years in Marin County, that is creating better and better beaver habitat for potential beavers' arrival at some point in the future. We did also do site visits and look at the conditions firsthand. So the model is a good kind of tool to just look at the different toggles and answer questions that we have. But ultimately, it's the site visits and getting out there and really getting a sense of the landscape to see if in fact there is good habitat. Because like Brock was describing, you know, if we were to just get permission at some point to do a beaver relocation, for example, you would need deep enough habitat already for beaver to be able to escape from predation. And so either that's there already, or you can engage in restoration techniques that create that, so that when that day comes, the beaver have that, because they would perish much too quickly. And we don't want to spend all this energy and effort in you know, creating a lion feeding program as much as we really want to support the beavers so that they can survive. And you can see here we've got this scorecard. This is what they use in the Methow Beaver project, which is up in Washington, and that's how they help try to characterize what the habitat looks like. So that's all the physical characteristics. And you know, ultimately we're in the process of writing that all up and just helping folks like sort through those details of what we discovered in that. And there's plenty of land that we did not get access to and did not see, but certainly have taken a crack at a starting, you know, point to just see what we found and if any low-hanging fruit emerge. But ultimately the most important and next steps is really looking at the political landscape, the landowner tolerance, and what those landowners think about beaver, and really just start educating folks about the potential beaver could have for helping return longer, slower water flows later into the season and creating these greater wetted buffers. And so that's a big piece for sure. And then ultimately, if we are going to, you know, initiate some kind of restoration process, can we mute our, we have a participant who's not muted, and I will stop just so we can, thank you, appreciate that, Linda. So ultimately, yes, if we were to take next steps and go further with a beaver restoration pilot proposal process, there would need to be some agency, a landowner, an NGO, ideally all three working together, that would be willing to act as the lead entity to go through the process of securing permissions, permits, and funding. And in initial conversations that we have had with the department about Marin specifically, you know, ultimately they need to be on board with it, and then the Board of Supervisors, the Farm Bureau, and obviously any neighboring landowners. So there's still many steps that would need to be taken to even go there. So that's what we're looking at. And I realize it's a lot to think about. It's enough to make me want to go to a doctor, and I'd much rather take 2 aspirin myself than aspirin if I can. They're very sweet smelling, and beaver love aspirin, by the way. It's one of their favorite foods. But again, this whole question of landowner acceptance, it's a thing, and you really do, you can't just, you know, it's so wonderful. They're lovely creatures. They do all these, you know, amazing things. However, there are valid concerns, and so you need to address those and really look at where you're talking about to see if it makes sense for those landowners to bring beaver into their landscape, because they do convert lower areas, you know, floodplains that have become dry back into wetlands. And not all ranchers want that. There are ranchers, however, who are now willing to go on record saying we wouldn't have a ranching operation without beaver. So it really just depends on how much land they have to commit to beaver wetlands. And then the roads and the infrastructure, you know, can be prone to beaver flooding as well. And then since beaver are the vegetarians that I was talking about, you need to be prepared to have your vegetation, you know, becoming beaver food and building materials. Not all of it, but some of it. And depending on what species you have, it could be a lot of it. So those are just the kind of questions that you need to vet with your landowners when you're having those conversations. We have lots of strategies, however, to really soften the blow that beaver habitat modifications could have to a landowner. And this is similar to the work that I was talking about that we've been doing now with Sonoma Water in Sonoma County. And it's this whole suite of techniques we call coexistence methods, non-lethal management. One of the big issues that beavers love to get in trouble with is the blocking of culverts. For them, a culvert is just a hole in a dam. The roadbed is the dam, the culvert is just the hole, and all they have to do is plug it. Boom, now they have deeper water, they can swim away from their predators. It's just like, wow, that wasn't that hard. They love it. That obviously has its problems. And so simply by putting in something like this trapezoidal fence, which just puts them far enough away from the culvert that they can't reach it. It's so much area that when lock this fence, it flows over, that they recognize that it's having no effect on raising the water anymore. They give up. They are actually calorically aware and conservative, and they don't want to waste their precious vegetarian food calories on work that isn't going to get them any results. And this is a rancher actually in Lower Sonoma Creek who the beavers they come into her pond and they bank burrow, and she loves them. She's a biologist also, in addition to being a rancher, and she wants them there, but they block her overflow outlet pipe here, which is a problem because this is a levee that if that got blown, it would be very catastrophic. And so simply by putting a fence with a pipe and a cage at the end there, so the beaver don't feel the flow, they don't smell it, they can't hear it, which induces them to want to block and build, then that prevents them. So those techniques are very affordable, under $2,000. You can do it in a day and it lasts for years and years. So we really try to let folks know that that's a possible solution. Similar, if you have vegetation, you pick your heritage trees that you want to keep. You can fence them individually, you can fence them as groups, you can put hot wire around them. I know some beaver got into some really high-end Merlot grapes in Sonoma Creek over a decade ago and did not survive depredation from that fine choice in varietal, but poor choice in landowner, because that the landowner did not tolerate that $10,000 grapevine getting chewed down by the beavers. So you definitely want to protect your prize crops. And you can even do something as creative as getting exterior latex paint color matched to your tree bark and put masonry sand in it and paint it onto the tree. And the beaver don't like to chew that sand. It's really horrible on their teeth. And so this is what they did here in Taylor Creek on the interpretive trail, where they have these heritage trees that have the sheep herders signatures on them, and they don't want to obscure with the fencing. And so this is a technique that you can employ if you feel like getting on the artistic aesthetic side of things. Also, another big concern is flooding. Beaver, again, they're trying to create deeper water for themselves to protect themselves and to farm their aquatic food sources that they love to eat. And so thankfully, this device called a flexible pond leveler is a simple device. It's just flexible pipe that you put in through the dam. You set it at the height that you want the pond level to be at. You sink it so that it just stays on the bottom. You can use just concrete blocks or T-posts. And then you put a cage around the inlet, so again, the beaver can't. And now this just becomes like a spillway that you've put in, and the beaver stop building. They may put a little bit more on top thinking it'll make a difference. It doesn't. They give up, they go elsewhere, or they just live with it. Or they might just go a little bit downstream, but it's still, the idea is you want to keep them in the area so you get all the benefits of the beaver, but you get to decide how much you let them flood. And so this is a community up in El Dorado Hills, which has experienced a huge amount of development in the last decade. And we were finally invited, after many beaver had been killed, to come in and demonstrate one of these pond leveler devices in partnership with the American River Conservancy and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the El Dorado Hills Community Services District. And now it's become a great tour site. We take folks out, we show them how it works, and it's gotten a lot of other neighboring communities and developments excited to implement this kind of strategy themselves. We did a similar project with Caltrans as well. And so it's totally doable. Again, not very complicated and very affordable. And we have all these great examples of beaver providing habitat benefits in many different urban and suburban environments that we can go and look at for ourselves to see how it's working. This is Napa Creek in downtown Napa. And if you go over on the Pearl Street Bridge here, this is looking from the Pearl Street Bridge, you can see the amazing little beaver dams that are set up here. This is actually a restoration project that happened to protect the bank and provide overflow to go out a river. So this is this huge, bigger project, but in this project, they were willing to allow the beaver to stay and to augment and accentuate the restoration once it was complete. And so now you've got all this great vegetation and there's a pedestrian bridge over here. And if you go there right now, there is actually a kit that you can observe swimming around with the mother beaver and the father beaver and learning how to harvest and bring food back to the lodge. This is a great wildlife site and the wine tasting house, and it's all there. Similar, this is on Tulakay Creek, also in downtown Napa. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the Martinez beavers who became famous in 2007 when the city council decided they were going to kill them. And the community rose up and put in a pond leveler and saved them. And now there's an annual beaver festival and lots of great work coming out of the Worth a Dam organization to support beaver advocacy and coexistence. Definitely check it out if you haven't been there. So speaking of resources, this is the booklet that Brock was talking about, and I posted a link earlier in the chat. If you caught that, you can just download it for free. Here it is again in this slide. And then Linda was mentioning that she's reading the book Eager, and we're so grateful to Ben Goldfarb because he's a fantastic writer and very entertaining and informative. And he really helped put the beaver cause on the map. And there is an entire chapter about California that you can learn more about the crazy backwards beaver blind spot that Brock calls, we have here in California, and what we're doing to change that. So highly recommend it. And it's also a really great audiobook if you would like to listen to it instead of reading it. We had a Beaver Summit in April and it was super fantastic. It sold out, 1,000 people attended, and really, really high quality, short, but very impactful presentations. And now it's all available online, the recordings, and it's all curated by each individual talk. So if you go to this website, cabeaversummit.org, you can look at each individual talk if you want to, and I highly recommend it. It'll give you the quick and dirty version of beaver education in California and the issues that we're grappling with and some of the solutions. And we really want to support citizens and communities, cities, counties to really just start thinking about, all right, how can we take next steps? How can we become supporters, stewards of beaver directly in our communities or indirectly by supporting other communities? And there's a great organization, the Slow Beaver Brigade in San Luis Obispo County, with just that group of citizens got together and found the nearest beavers that they could come and bring people to tour on the Salinas River. And so, if you all want to start something in Marin, I would highly recommend that you just start meeting and that you go out to your nearest beaver colonies, whether it's in the lower Sonoma Creek area, or if you want to all go together to Napa, and really just start having the conversation and educating folks about the importance of beaver and how we're still trying to bring them back, and we can start educating folks about that importance so that they know that this is something that we used to have that we don't have anymore. We too, extinct species, huge impact on our environment, and we have a choice whether or not we're going to be a degenerative impact or regenerative impact, as Brock likes to frame it. And so we certainly support you in figuring out how to be a regenerative disturber and a keystone species that is part of the solution, and really helping to sustain and regenerate this amazing earth that we get to live on. And it does take a village, it's a whole group effort, and we got all 4 paws and webbed feet in, and we'd love for you to join us in the effort. And thank you for all that you're doing and for listening in tonight. And with that, I'll stop my share and we can start taking questions. Ta-da.
Thank you, Brock and Kate. That was a wonderful presentation. You answered a lot of questions that I know I had. But I want to drill down on a question that Hans Schmidt asked. Why would Nevada, I guess, ranchers kill beavers? And I guess we found out several reasons why they would. And it looks like those issues are being resolved if ranchers are open to it. So I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add to that, but here, let me ask this. As the beavers get going and they're eating their vegan diet and they're eating a lot of the vegetation on property, how long a period is it until you see the benefits of the beavers? Because it sounds like they encourage the willows to grow through their work, et cetera. So what's that length of time till it starts to reverse and benefits are visible?
You're going to get the classic cop-out answer, which is it depends. It really does depend on where you are, what your water and flow regime is, how much precipitation, is your system spring-fed or not. If you're in an area that has perennial flow and it hasn't there aren't these structures that are slowing that water down, if a beaver shows up and puts a dam, you get an immediate effect. That just starts hydrating your riparian corridor just overnight. And when we do these mock beaver dams, which I got to just do recently up with the Mountain Maidu tribe up in their historic homelands up in Tascoyoma on Willow Creek, and literally once you start putting these in, it's just like within 4 hours you start seeing the landscape getting hydrated, and there's an immediate response because so many things are looking for water right now. And so again, it can be really immediate like that, and then in other cases it can be slower. It really depends. I mean, the vegetation question, that response is going to be for the bigger vegetation, it's going to take longer. But in a lot of cases, part of the restoration effort includes making sure that you do some revegetation along with the building of structures and the reintroduction of beaver. And so that you're, and especially if you have time to do it in advance, then that's going to accelerate that. But it's like streams evolve on their own, and that takes millennia. Beavers support stream evolution within 5 to 10 to 20 years, depending on where you are. I mean, we have a site in the foothills where just by stopping killing the beaver in this single threaded, super narrow, dry channel that was overgrazed, and reinforcing their dams and putting in some little extra ones as well, within 5 years, they increased the wetland by 800% just in 5 years. And so that's an instance where it's a huge return on your investment very quickly. So it depends, and I'm sure Brock has more to add to that.
No, not much more. I think just, to the initial question about people killing beavers in general, Nevada and otherwise, there's just a cultural legacy, generational thing, misinformation. And I think what we're witnessing, kind of as Kate was saying, especially in the arid Mountain West, and especially with ranchers increasingly, is water is life. And and when they don't have water, they're selling cows and they're out of business. And the ranchers that had beavers on their land stayed in business in these big droughts in years past. And so they're pragmatic characters. So it's an evolutionary change in the consciousness. It's a lot of times what we talk about the work we do is ecosystem restoration. The ecosystem of human egos needs a new storyline, and the storyline is we're a part of it, not apart from it, and we should learn to play with the critters and the processes that have created conditions conducive. And then, as Kate finished up, we could be regenerative disturbers and step into the matrix of also being a part of this solution, right? So.
Right, great. We've got a couple more questions. Cindy Machado of Marin Humane Society. How do beavers interact with river otters?
You want to take that, Brock?
Yeah, I typed up an answer to that one too. I mean, I think, the fun part is as Kate was saying, beavers are vegetarians. As we know, rivers are not. They're carnivorous, primarily fish and crawdads and such. And so the beauty of it is better beaver habitat makes better fish and crawdad habitat. And so the otters definitely benefit the more the beavers create habitat for them. There have been some cases where river otters, may have eaten some kits and beavers and things, but beavers and river otters coexist throughout their shared ranges and have done so for a long time. And I think they work it out. As we know, the river otter populations, and maybe if Megan, Isidore, others come on with the Otter Spotters program, boy, the river otters are doing really well in the state, in the Bay Area right now. So they're doing good.
Excellent. Nona Dennis asks, what constitutes sufficient genetic variability for a sustainable population?
I put a brief answer in the chat. Interestingly, the Eurasian beaver has had a lot more studies done on its genetic composition, in part because they were nearly made extinct so much earlier. And so they've experienced this very severe genetic bottleneck with far fewer individuals remaining. And so they've had to be really careful with how they're working out their breeding strategies. North American beaver, we were lucky that there were enough beaver left over that we have not observed to the degree that we're aware of anyway, as much of a genetic bottleneck. But that is an interesting question. And, I mean, we have not even had the North American beaver genetics really sorted through yet to the degree. There used to be all these different subspecies that they thought existed, but none of them were scientifically vetted or peer reviewed. And so right now the international community doesn't recognize any subspecies of the North American beaver. And so I think, one of the ways that the Washington program deals with genetic diversity is they actually trap beavers throughout the summer and let them self-select their own breeding combinations. And so they have the luxury of using a fish raceway where they let the beavers play the dating game, and those that decide they want to be together, those are the ones, they've been sexed, so they know their gender, and those are the ones that they release. So they let them do it themselves.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Madeline Kellner, she thought she'd heard beavers entered bay waters to colonize tributaries to the bay. If that is true, would they enter the ocean waters to colonize coastal creeks?
Beavers are certainly known to swim in salt water and estuarine water. And yeah, as to the bay, and if the delta was the stronghold back in the day, and then they moved out of the delta and found their way into Alhambra Creek where Martinez is, or if they ever were taken out of the lower portions of Napa or Sonoma, those things aren't quite clear. Or the southern part of down in the southern part of San Jose, Coyote Creek, and some of those tribs there. But yeah, so a big question is are beavers, any of these Bay Area beavers, gonna go for it, go under the Golden Gate, hook it around the potato patch there, and get themselves into trying to get into Redwood? I see Laura's got a question about Redwood Creek and Muir Beach area, kind of get into there first, or see if they could sneak into Bolinas Lagoon and get up into Pine Gulch, or make it all the way around Tomales Point and come on up into Tomales Bay. Anything is possible, but boy, that's quite a swim. So I don't know. They are known to go overland quite a distance. They've been known to walk 10, 20 plus miles overland, which is an interesting thing.
Wow.
There are beavers in these up in Washington in mud flat, estuarine, mud flat kinds of habitats. So they're very resilient in that regard. But our sense is that the timing and the likelihood that a beaver is going to brave the open ocean under the Golden Gate and make that reintroduction. And you got to have more than one, unless it's the pregnant female. And then the genetics question is up. Instead of waiting, if people really want them there, we might want to engage in this question, what we're talking about, of assisted migration, or AKA relocation. And then as far as Redwood Creek goes, I would just say, we, based on what Laura's acknowledging, many of us may know, the amount of money and effort that's been put into that system, we kind of avoided getting in the thick of the politics of Redwood Creek and Muir Beach right now with the beavers. There's a little bit too much going on down there, and the constraints. It didn't map out very well on the Brat layer because of so much adjacent infrastructure. But Park Service in general, especially Point Reyes National Seashore, with whom we have actually spoken to a number of times, and especially in relationship to Olima and part of Upper Pine Gulch and the West Slope there, they're very supportive of the idea of beavers. They're just, as we well know, I think after fallow deer fights and oyster fights and now the cow and elk fights, they got a little bit more on their hands, and they are clear they lack the capacity to take on the beaver as a relocation idea at this moment.
Anybody else have questions? I don't see any more in the chat. I have a question. How many beaver are there in California right now? Has there been a tally? There was 1,000 when Fish and Game tallied it up almost 100 years, over 100 years ago. What do we have now?
It's a great question. And the director of our Cal Fish and Wildlife, Chuck Bonham, asked us the same thing. And it's not actually something that we've been able to determine, nor have we been funded to even try to determine that. And we pushed it back to the department saying, that's actually your job, especially if you're setting no bag limits around depredation. You should be knowing, what your population is before you determine how many you're allowing to be killed. And so, again, we're relying on citizens to really keep track of beaver numbers. We have a rough sense of distribution.
Kate, sometimes you're freezing up a little bit in your screen.
Oh, she seems to be frozen.
Yeah. Well, all right.
Well, I can pick it up until she unfreezes. Sure. Yeah. So nobody knows, and it's an interesting question. So again, like she was saying, things like iNaturalist and citizen science, and beginning to try and get some sense of it about just the basic distribution, the geography of where they are, and a little bit of sense about the number of dams in a system and some of the scope and scale of the habitat. We could try to make an estimate there, but there is nobody that I know of in the beaver world is willing to put a number on the state population at this point.
Okay, thank you, Brock. Do you have any idea, this is from Cindy Machado, do you have any idea of how many depredation permits are issued by Fish and Wildlife each year?
That is a known number, and boy, off the top right now, I don't track that. You know who tracks that really well is Heidi Perryman, who's with Wortha Dam in Martinez, and there's a number of those folks, and they do actually submit requests, and they get data, and they pay attention to it. The vast majority of beavers being depredated in the state right now are concentrated in the Central Valley. Interestingly enough, it's a lot in the foothill counties, sort of North Sacramento foothills. Some of the lowland the irrigated agriculture folks in some of those communities like Kate showed there, is generally where there's a lot. There's a little bit in the Sierras, and so yeah, we're working on trying to figure that piece of the puzzle out as far as the numbers depredated. It's in the hundreds, probably, depending, but I don't know if Kate is tracking these numbers about annual depredation permits and there's depredation permits given and then actual beavers taken, sorting that data out. But again, Heidi's really pays a lot of attention, but I don't know, Kate, you got a off the cuff sense?
Yeah, sorry, I dropped off. It's from Heidi's she really teases out, like you're saying, Brock, and she's the one who publishes those data, and they are incomplete, and it's in the high hundreds and sometimes the low thousands, sometimes up to 4,000 a year. So,
Oh, no, wow.
oh yeah, it can really go high. So it really just depends on what's happening that year.
Right.
And but yeah, for folks that want to get those hard data, definitely just reach out to Heidi. She usually puts it on her website as well.
Well, thank you. I don't see any more questions. I want to give a quick shout out to Sally Gale, who Vicki Nichols just reminded me, suggested we have you guys talk in February of 2019. And so Sally, if you're here, we finally followed through. I want to thank you both for speaking, sharing your information, and just, all the work, the good work that you're doing. And we'll certainly be posting the recording. Oh, here's a question from Laura. Contact person at California Department of Fish and Wildlife to reach out on beaver policy. And this is our last question of the night. Is there an individual you would recommend?
I would just say that on not so much on beaver policy, but just as far as beaver management and the relationship and the request for depredation permits, Stacy Martinelli generally appears to be the person who's dealing with many of our counties in the North Bay and a little, over around to Napa and Marin and Sonoma. At the policy level, there's been some changes at the upper management in Sacramento right now. And so we're still trying, to get a sense of who's the ideal policy person, below Chuck Bonham there. Ultimately, it's been folks who are the fisheries department and wildlife department, but both of those departments, as of recently, have had retirements, and there are some interim folks there. So a little bit of a moving target in that regard.
Okay, good to have a name.
Yeah, stay tuned. And, if you want to get updates, you can always just reach out to us, and we provided our emails in the slides, and you can just go to our website and find us.
Thank you. And please put MCL on your distribution list. We would like to stay informed and keep our members informed. We'll be posting the recording of this program and additional information. Thanks to you both and everybody. We look forward to seeing you on July 21st for our next MCL After Hours, and have a great evening. And again, thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.